Nobody knew when the killings and disappearances started, or if they were even connected. But when two policemen found a body buried not so deep beneath the ground at a popular hunting spot, with clothes and boots still on, they knew something wasn't right in this town. As responsible policemen, they left the crime scene undisturbed and marked the area on the map. They went to report it and called for professionals, who carefully dug out the area to find what would later be revealed as the remains of a 23-year-old woman named Sherry Morrow, who worked as an exotic dancer. At the crime scene, the only real clue they discovered was a .223 cartridge casing. The body itself had bullet wounds, which led the investigators to make the connection between the cartridge casing found at the scene and the gun wounds. Missing persons reports revealed that Sherry had been missing for about 10 months. What's more, the clothes on her body didn't have bullet holes or burn marks on them, which made it clear that she was dressed up after she had been shot dead. The missing persons report for Sherry also stated that the last thing Sherry had ever told her friends was that she was going to meet a person who had offered her $300 to take her pictures. There was no doubt that if the police figured out who that person was, the case would be solved. But this wasn't the only body that was found in this condition. Other bodies belonging to different women were also found, decomposed and half buried much like Sherry's, with the same .223 caliber casing as found next to Sherry. This made it clear to the police that they were dealing with a serial killer. But the police couldn't even go public with any of their speculations, as there was no evidence to back them up at this time. So they kept working quietly in hopes of finding whoever it was that was responsible for the deaths of these women. During this time, other women kept going missing, most of them exotic dancers or sex workers like the other victims. However, a year later in 1983, the police managed to find a break in the case. A 17-year-old girl named Cindy Paulson had given them a call from a far-off motel, and when they got to her, they saw that she was handcuffed, half naked, and had suffered several wounds on her body. Immediately they knew she had been through something horrific. They freed her from her handcuffs and asked her to recall what she had been through. Cindy remained composed as she recounted her horrifying experience. She said, on June 13, 1983, a ratty-looking bearded man pulled his car up near Cindy and offered $200 for sexual favors. She agreed and got into his car, only to find herself handcuffed to the door the moment she got in. The man then pulled out a gun to threaten her and drove them away to his home. The house was in a wealthy neighborhood, and as soon as they got inside, the man took Cindy downstairs where he had a chain hanging down. He cuffed the chain around her neck so she couldn't escape, and then he tortured her and assaulted her for several hours. Once he was done, he went back upstairs to take a nap and warned Cindy that any attempt to escape or alert the neighbors would end up getting her killed. Hours later, he came back downstairs and untied her. He then took her upstairs where Cindy noticed all of his hunting trophies and equipment, realizing just how twisted this man really was. Next, Cindy was taken to his car, which he drove to a small hangar. The man owned a plane as well, which he was going to use to take Cindy to a remote cabin in the woods where he went hunting often. But this man let his guard down in his sense of victory over his victim. The moment he turned around to start loading his plane and preparing for the flight, Cindy saw her chance to escape. In this tense moment, she even had enough composure to leave her shoe behind as evidence of her being there. Then, she ran for her life, and when the man noticed, it was already too late. Cindy made her way to the highway, where a truck driver found her. Seeing this half-naked girl with handcuffs on, the driver immediately knew she needed to be taken to safety, and so he took her to the nearest motel where she called the police. Her story left the police shocked. They immediately took her to the hospital, and on the way there, Cindy told the police to go back to the airport where she was held captive. The man was long gone from the airport, but Cindy recognized the plane immediately. The police began noting down details of the plane. While they were doing that, a security guard approached them and told them that he saw the owner the previous night and had noted down his numbered license plate since he thought the man was a little suspicious. This helped the police find the man who owned the plane and car, while also matching the description that Cindy gave them. The man was Robert Hansen. Surprisingly, He was well liked among his neighbors and even owned a successful bakery. He was an avid hunter as well. When the police approached him, he acted as if nothing was wrong and complied with everything. The police found nothing, but did note that the hunting trophies in the house matched the exact description Cindy had given them. But when they asked Hansen about his activities in the past few days, he said he'd been hanging out with his friends. The friends even provided alibis. This threw the police off their investigation and led them to doubt Cindy. They asked if she would take a lie detector test to prove her honesty, but she refused and promptly moved out of the area to live elsewhere, for obvious reasons. After being sent back to square one with women still going missing, the police enlisted the help of a professional FBI profiler, John Douglas. Based on the information he was given, Douglas predicted that the murderer would be an avid hunter with poor self-esteem, a history of being rejected by women, and a need to preserve souvenirs of his victims' jewels. He also speculated that the killer probably had a stuttering issue, but was well liked by his neighbors, and probably owned a successful business to be able to afford a plane. Sure enough, this description led the police back to Hansen, and this time, with a search warrant, they were able to search his house thoroughly and found the murder trophies as Douglas had predicted. One of the jewelries belonged to a known victim, and there was even a map with 37 X marks on it, some of which matched the locations where bodies had been found previously. They even found the same .223 caliber shells in his house. When confronted with the evidence found in his home, Hansen denied it for as long as he could, but he eventually began to blame the women and tried to justify his actions. Eventually confessing to each item of evidence as it was presented to him, he admitted to his killing spree against Alaskan women starting in 1971. It turns out that Hansen's earliest victims were actually young teenage girls, usually between the ages of 16 and 19. Then he started targeting sex workers. What Hansen confessed to doing to his victims was horrifying. He would drive around to find lone women and convince them to let him take pictures. The women would agree to meet him, and when they did, he would handcuff them. He had done this so many times that it was like muscle memory at this point. Once abducted, he would assault the women at his house and then take them to a remote hunting cabin which was surrounded by water, meaning there was no way they could possibly escape. Once there, he would undress and blindfold the women and give them a false sense of hope that they might have a chance to escape. But even if they did manage to escape the forest, they would only end up drowning or freezing in the water. The women would of course run for their lives, tripping, slipping, all the while Hansen hunted them down. Then he would shoot them, redress them, and bury them where they died. The police arrested him immediately. Once faced with the trial, Hansen agreed to enter a plea bargain where he would confess to the murders that the police had evidence for and help find the locations on the map which led to other bodies. In exchange, he wanted to go to a federal prison and receive no publicity. Hansen was charged with assault, kidnapping, multiple weapons offenses, theft, and insurance fraud. The last charge was related to a claim filed with the insurance company over the alleged theft of some trophies. He used the proceeds to purchase his plane. He was sentenced by a jury to 461 years plus life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Hansen showed investigators 17 grave sites in and around south-central Alaska, 12 of which were unknown to investigators. But he refused to reveal the locations for some of the marks, including 3 in Resurrection Bay, near Seward. The remains of 12 victims were extracted by police and returned to their families. Some of these remains were so decomposed, it was impossible to find out who the body belonged to. The remaining victims were never found. Hansen died in 2014, taking the secrets with him to the grave.